This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. And before I get to my guest this evening, I just wanted to mention a couple of things, if I don't choke to death first. I have been asked repeatedly, I don't know if repeatedly is quite right, to share some of my experiences in the Vietnam War. And in the mid-1980s into the 1990s, Bob Cornett and I wrote a series of books called Vietnam Ground Zero about a fictional Green Beret team in Vietnam. And those are being republished. I jokingly say they've been translated into English because the publisher is now English. They came out originally, well, actually, they were originally published by a Canadian publisher, now that I think about it. Anyway, they're being republished, and in a way of kind of promoting the books and that sort of thing, and create my bona fides, I suppose. I put up a blog at vietnamgroundzero.blogspot.com. Vietnam Ground Zero, all one word, all lowercase. And these are some of my experiences in the Vietnam War. Tried to be as careful with the facts as I could be, but I'm dealing with memories that are 50 years old, so I might have got some of the information wrong. Got some records I can look at and some earlier writings that I can look at to help me make this thing as accurate as possible. But I thought I'd just mention that. I also reactivated something called the science fiction site, which is, of course, the science fiction site at blogspot.com. And it's just science fiction stories that I've produced or information about science fiction things that might be of interest to some of the people who regularly listen to this program. But I thought I'd mention that at the beginning here. I am going to be joined by James McQUISTON. He is a fellow with the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, although he lives in the United States. He received this honor after a few decades of researching and writing about Scottish clans. McQUISTON has authored several books and a considerable number of web and magazine articles. In the fall of 2016, he made contact with the crew of treasure hunters on Oak Island, Nova Scotia, led by Rick and Marty Lagina and Greg Tester. And we've talked about this program in the past here. He is also a member of the Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society and the National Trust of Scotland. His theory about the treasure ranked as number 6 on a special top 25 episode of The Curse of Oak Island in 2019. He has appeared on the show 5 times so far. The first piece of information he passed on to the Oak Island team is that his own distant cousin, Sir Ian MacDonald MacUisdean, is a Premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia, a title first received in 1625. He is certain the Oak Island mystery began with an attempt by Scots to settle Nova Scotia in the early 1600s, ending with their expulsion in 1632. He feels they left behind a cache of treasure and goods on Oak Island and were never able to retrieve it due to the French taking over Nova Scotia and the War of Three Kingdoms beginning in Great Britain. He backs all his theories up with historical documents, logic, and science where available. His latest book is Oak Island and the Mayflower. Welcome to A Different Perspective.
Hi, it's nice to be with you today. Oh, and by the way, thank you for your service.
Thank you. So you've been to Oak Island, obviously, 5 times at least.
Well, actually, I've been on the island 10 times over a 3-year period because sometimes they would just say, come on down and hang out. Other times it would be for a specific meeting. One time we went up to New Ross, so we met on the island and milled around there for a couple hours till they got the film crew ready. And we went up to see the foundation at New Ross. But yes, and I've been in 5 I believe it's 5 war room meetings at this point. One wasn't filmed at all, and one was filmed in 2017, and it wasn't used. But then the other ones have been or will be used. Let's put it that way.
But
About 12 hours. Go ahead.
You contacted them, and then they invited you to come up to Oak Island?
Yeah, how it came about was I was finishing up or actually republishing, speaking of that, a McQUISTON book that I did for our family, a big 286-page book with all the information I could find about us. And one of the things in it was the story about Sir Ian MacDonald. The way they used to pronounce that is McQUISTON, like the McQUISTON. But believe me, I've heard 4 people who speak Gaelic tell me how you pronounce it, and I still can't tell you how it is. But anyway, it came out McQUISTON for my family. But and so I had been watching Oak Island only since season 3. I missed the first 2 seasons, and I was kind of nonchalantly watching it. And then I thought, Oak Island, Nova Scotia, Premier Baronet of Nova Scotia. Gee, I wonder if they have anything to do with each other. So I only looked into it a little bit, but I sent them an email saying, have you folks ever looked into this? And I had no intention of writing any books at this point. I only just wanted to share that information. They immediately wrote back, within a day or so, and said, we would like to speak with you. And they had Paul Troutman call me, and he talked for an hour asking a lot of questions. Most of them I didn't have the answers to, but I knew kind of where I could find them. So we started trading emails. Other people got on board to where I've now got just about everybody's email. So I call it my Oak Island team. But I would be sending them emails, and some of them were very long. And so at one point, one of them wrote me and said, you need to write a book, because all of this that you've been sending us is just it only exists in our emails, and it's going to get lost. And so I said, yeah, I think I'll try to do that. So I did, and that was Oak Island Missing Links. And it was more generic than the rest of the books, because I hadn't determined my final theory yet. But
well, let's do this, because I think one of the things that interested me, and it's really not covered well in the introduction. They did a special on the top 25 episode, which they were looking at 25 different theories of what Oak Island, the treasure, might be, or what's buried there. Is that the way that?
Yes. And they had 3 voting blocks. I know that one was the Oak Island team itself. One was tour people that came on the tour. I don't know what the third voting block was. I suspect that I made it as high in the numbers as I did because of the Oak Island team, because every time I've gone there, they just keep pummeling me with questions. But here's where we need to go with this. What was your theory? Okay, well, Nova Scotia was granted to this. He was actually Scottish, but he was working for the king in England, and his name was William Alexander, and this is all known history. And that was in 1621, and he started sending ships there, but he never really got a successful settlement there until 1629. Well,
let me interrupt here, because you just said something interesting. You said they never got a settlement there. Are you talking on Oak Island or Nova Scotia?
Nova Scotia itself. They made a few attempts till they finally got one, and it was on the other side of Nova Scotia where the French had been settled, and they chased the French out. Well, the kings of England and France were brother-in-laws, and they made a deal for a certain amount of money, the King of England would give Nova Scotia back. So he kind of stabbed his Knights Baronet in the back, and they had invested a lot of money. Each one of them had invested a lot of money. So in March of 1632, they were told to head home, and it was a relatively peaceful departure. They were allowed to take their weapons and their gold and silver and whatever. But the problem with that is that you can't sail across the North Atlantic in April, which is when they would have been trying to sail across. And I have that from old contemporary writings from Champlain and newer. I had a nice meeting with a sea captain up there that Rick Lagina set up, and just NOAA weather records, whatever. It's pretty much proven that they could not have sailed back. So the first notice in England that they got back was in June. So they had to have spent their time somewhere. And what I believe they took with them when they went there originally was a stolen treasure, or at least part of it, that they had intended to finance Nova Scotia with. Because you can't just go there with nothing and with a bunch of men and not have some kind of amount of money, to carry on business, because they intended to stay there. And that treasure that was stolen has never been it's never been discovered where it ever went.
Well, do we have documentation about this treasure?
Yes, it was documented in the court case. It was documented in the Privy Council minutes of the King, and it was documented in, of all places, Freemasonry records. The man who stole it was indicted and was waiting trial for 2 years, and then all of a sudden he got a full pardon and became a full partner with William Alexander, and basically his right-hand man. And these were the people coming to Nova Scotia in the 1600s. Right, and it was more like the sons of William Alexander, and each knight baronet had to provide 6 people that were tradesmen, blacksmith, builders, whatever. And so they had invested the men and the money to do this because they thought they were going to build a new country. And I'm sure William Alexander intended to name himself King of Nova Scotia. I have a lot of evidence in my books. So I believe that when they were trying to leave, they came around the Horn of Nova Scotia from the leeward side and into the bad weather of the North Atlantic, went up the coast and pulled into Mahone Bay, which would be the absolute best place to pull in to get out of the storm. I believe they lost the ship in there. And in fact, on my second book, I actually put a sunken ship on the cover. And that was back in 2018. So I believe that they buried what they had to and what they did not want to take back with them. And I believe they only thought this was a bump in a road, because it had already been a real struggle from 1622 all the way up to 1632. It had already been a 10-year struggle. And
well, let me interrupt quickly here. Would they have had the knowledge or the capability of digging a money pit as large as and as deep as it's supposedly shown on the various programming?
Well, they had within the family alone, the Alexander family, they had 2 different men that served as the master of public works for Scotland, building castles and cathedrals and bridges and all that. And William Alexander and one of his sons were the masters of mining in Scotland, and they actually had a 180-foot hand-dug silver mine in Scotland. But all the people that went over had to be craftsmen. They had to have some kind of skill, and the ships themselves, generally had a group of craftsmen on them to rebuild the mast if it broke, or patch the ship or whatever. So they had.
Well, let me break in. I need to break in once more because I got to take a commercial break. We're coming up against a hard break here.
Okay.
I did want to say that there are some other fine programs about the paranormal on the X-Zone Broadcast Network at xzbn.net. Take a look at the listings on the X-Zone website, and you'll find something that'll spark your interest, I'm sure. When we come back, we'll be talking to Jim, about his family's connection to the Money Pit and Oak Island. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. I am here with James McQUISTON. We are practicing social distancing. I'm at my house. I'm sure he's at his, and the studio is somewhere else. So we're not contaminating one another in today's environment. When we went away, we were talking about the Scots abandoning Nova Scotia under duress, unable to cross the North Atlantic in April, and we know how well that worked out for the Titanic, don't we? I just thought I'd throw that in for some purpose. I have no idea. And I was always bothered by, and it gets back to the point we were talking about just before we took our break, that I didn't think a pirate or a pirate ship, the people on a pirate ship would have the capability of creating the great money pit as it's been described in all the books and all of that. But from what you're talking about, when the Scots abandoned Nova Scotia, they had with them the people who had that kind of capability. They had that kind of knowledge to do something like that as it's been described.
Yes, they were actually there to build 100 towns all the way around the coast. So they were already determined to build when they got there, and they did build a fort at Charles Fort at Port Royal. But another element to this is that it's often said that it would take a long time to pull this off, but Gilbert Hedden, which you may have heard his name on the show a few times, he owned the island for a number of years in the 30s, and he was an engineer. And he wrote in his book, wrote it in a letter to a gentleman in 1967, that he thought the money pit could be built in one summer season with 50 to 100 men. And two other engineers that studied it in more recent years, Graham Harris and Les McPhee, wrote a book, Oak Island and Its Lost Treasure. And they said essentially the same thing, and they were both engineers. So I think that people look back at people from that age and think that they were rudimentary, not. But you look at the castles and cathedrals, and we can't even reproduce what people used to do back in those days. Everything nowadays, not everything, but an awful lot nowadays is done very sloppily. By a lounge chair today, you'll fall apart in a couple of years. If you bought it 20 years ago, it'd still be sitting there in the corner. So, it's just the way it's been. You mentioned the Titanic. The other than the fact that it fell apart, the craftsmanship in there was so great that they wouldn't even try to reproduce it nowadays. So they were used to doing hard things with manual labor, and they also had a good motive, because they wanted to, in my theory anyway, they wanted to hide the treasure and possibly some other items. I believe one of their ships wrecked there, and the reason why is because there's so many parts from ships that have been found on the island, and if you look at where Oak Island is, it's way in the back of the bay, and there's a whole lot of other places that parts from ships would have got hung up on before they ever made it back to Oak Island. So that made me think that there was a shipwreck closer to Oak Island, and in fact, in 2019, I found out there was, because Rick Lagina had set up this meeting with this sea captain who also was a lifelong treasure hunter, and he actually dove on the shipwreck. He told me it has 32 cannons on it. He pulled up silverware from it that has the same family crest or emblem as the guy that stole the treasure.
Well, the other thing, I wasn't, when we looked at it originally, it was supposedly pirate treasure, and I didn't think pirates would have the technical know-how to build something like that. Not that the people in the 1600s couldn't have constructed it, but you needed a special kind of person, a special trained people to do that. And what you're saying, they certainly had that there. Yes. But the other thing that strikes me is an awful lot of what they found on the island now, and it's not buried very deep, suggest a British presence on the island as opposed to a Scottish presence or a French presence.
Right. And I don't believe that the Scots were on the island very long. But the island, another thing a lot of people miss is that they actually surveyed the island in 1762, which was 30 some years before the money pit was found, and they were logging it and growing crops on it. So to find ox shoes from the 1700s doesn't really mean anything in regard to the treasure. Because
my point, that was my point exactly. But here's the other thing that you just said, there were people farming on the island. Yet I understood from reading some of the earlier materials about Oak Island that the three boys were inspired to go to Oak Island because there had been strange lights seen on the island at night and things like that. But from what you're saying, that would have been evidence of the people who were either working the island or living on the island. There wouldn't be anything strange about fires or lights on the island prior to the discovery of the money pit.
Right, and the people, those boys, their fathers owned land there already. There's a lot of land records available from about 1755 on, is where they founded Halifax in 1749, but they were still under pressure with the French because the French and Indian War was still going on. And but that's when they started inviting people to settle, because they wanted to have a presence of people there. And eventually they brought the Germans over to Lunenburg for the same reason. So they would have friendly people living nearby. But they were practically given the island lands away to anybody that wanted them. And they surveyed it in 1762, and those are the same lots they use today, the exact same lots. There's, I believe, 32 of them. And so again, a lot of the surface finds, even though they're very interesting, and I've actually been able to hold some of them, and I had to hold my tongue about them for almost a year because they told me, you can look at this and touch it, but don't tell anybody. But they are interesting, and they tell somewhat of the story, but I'm always about digging down deep. You know, when they pulled up bones from 150 feet, and they pulled that parchment up years ago, and all that, there's no excuse or logical reason for those to be down there if somebody's just farming or just logging, you know.
But you have to remember that after the alleged discovery of the money pit, an awful lot of people dug an awful lot of holes and an awful lot of tunnels on that island all over the place trying to get at that specific money pit. So when you find something buried deep, I'm not overly concerned about that. I think that it can be explained by all that activity on the island. I'm surprised the island hasn't sunk into the ocean as much excavation that has gone on it.
Yeah, the Swiss cheese island.
Yeah, and the other thing is, they found a coin. I think it was dated 1632, and they were all excited about that. And I said, I've got a $50 that was minted in 1855, and if I dropped it out in the parking lot tomorrow, it doesn't mean that it was been there since 1855. It just means it was minted there, and that's not a way of dating anything by the dates on coins and that sort of thing. So I wonder, they've got an archaeologist, and he must explain that to them.
Yeah, actually now this year they have a team of them, but Laird Niven, I've met him, and he's extremely sincere, business-like person is all I can say. And this year they've got four new archaeologists in there, and I don't know if that had something to do with not having much staff because of COVID, or one of the things is if they're digging somewhere that's already been dug, they don't need any permits. But if they find something new, they have to get a permit from Nova Scotia government, and they're pretty darn strict. And so, like they showed me a spot. They showed me Samuel Ball's foundation a year or more before they worked there, but they said we can't go over to it. I think we had to stay back 200 feet because they didn't have a permit yet. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and there might be other reasons to be there, for things to be there, but when there's like a axe cut piece of wood pulled out of the money pit area that dates to as far back as 1626, then that makes you wonder. And I'd love to hear that, because that would fall right into my date. So, I wish they had a carbon dating set up lab right there on the island, and every time they found something, they rushed it in. I told them a long time ago, everything should be data-based, because you can, when you database items, then you step back and take the big picture view. But
you also know that radiocarbon dating isn't all that accurate.
Yeah, I know.
Especially something that new. And they always give a range, but I noticed last night on the program, they took, I think, the earliest date, and they didn't say, well, it could have been put there sometime between 1630 and 1680 or something like that. They just picked the earlier date and ran with it. And it kind of bothered me last night when they were talking about it that way.
And it's kind of strange. Wood obviously is the basis for carbon dating because carbon comes from wood. And one of the additional elements that wood would have, other than, or that an animal byproduct wouldn't, is that they don't know when the tree fell. So somebody could have came along and found a tree that had fallen 50 years ago, decided to use it in their log cabin. So they used to give a range of 75 to 80 years. Now they give a range of 25 years. I don't know why they've changed that, but yeah, I understand that it's not an exact science. I was glad to see them start using tree ring counting because that's a little bit more precise. A lot of the dates are guesswork, but that was one of the reasons I thought my theory could be correct, because I took a group of carbon dating records and I kind of bar graphed the oldest and latest dates that each one of those items could have come from, and the window that they created was 1620 to 1660, which would cover my storyline. So that was encouraging too, because you got to take whatever you can take. But that's one of the reasons why I go to the history books, because if I can find documents that, I have not yet found a document that says that they buried something on Oak Island, but I found documents that show that Knights Baronet owned Mahone Bay. Two different Knights Baronets owned Mahone Bay, 3 actually, during history. And another one owned 16,000 acres just down below from Mahone Bay at what they call Port Mutton. And I'm working on a 7th book right now, believe it or not. Of course, about writing a lot of books, but this is where it connects Oak Island to that New Ross location. And there are a number of indications that the Alexander families themselves, their property was up at New Ross. So
let me break in here, because I've got a couple of questions and we're going to have to take a break here.
Okay.
Pretty quick. But what I wanted to say was, when we come back, I'd like to talk about Joy Steele's theory about what it was, what really happened on Oak Island, and the idea that the British had built some kind of a ship repair area on Oak Island, which would explain an awful lot of the things that have been found by their excavations, and suggesting a longer history of inhabitation at Oak Island than we originally had thought when we started talking about the 1795 date, which is when the boys had found the money pit. I always worried about that idea, and I think you've taken it away now, that there was some kind of mystery on Oak Island with strange lights and things prior to them being over there. So when we come back, we'll kind of look into that sort of thing. Okay. And I did want to thank those of you who have purchased the Best of Project Blue book, which is the latest book I had published. It's been up and down on the Amazon bestsellers list. So if you've enjoyed it, please take a look at it. Maybe write a review, rate it. It helps spread the word. And I'd like you to take a look at Encounter in the Desert and Roswell in the 21st Century. And also, when you get a chance, look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com and the other 2 blogs that I've just started. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. I am here with James McQUISTON. We're talking about Oak Island. We've established, I guess, that the Scots were there in the 1600s. I think that the excavations that have been done by the Lagina boys and their teams suggest a major British presence there prior to 1795. I think what they've discovered there suggests some kind of a ship repair facility, which may explain everything that has been found on Oak Island. And what I wanted to kind of touch on, I talked to Joy Steele a number of years ago, and she said that they had found oak tar pits up and down the east coast of the United States into Canada. And she suggested that Oak Island may have been some kind of a repair facility for ships. You've suggested, of course, Mahone Bay was a protected area, and Oak Island is a logical place to set up some kind of facility like that where you could repair ships that may have been damaged in crossing the Atlantic or needed repairs and resupply. Are you familiar with Joy Steele's theories?
Yes, I am. I know she bases hers around 1720. There is no actual evidence that there was anything there in 1720. And there's also no evidence that there were necessarily tar kilns on Oak Island. Even the one that they keep showing this season, they have not found tar residue in it. So there has to be, if that's where it ends up going, there has to be a lot more evidence to it. But in my latest book, which is Oak Island and the Mayflower, it's a continuation of me showing historic documents and records that are telling the story from a different point of view of digging something out of the ground. And in this case, virtually everybody who first settled Oak Island was either a Freemason from the families of the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, or from Mayflower families, or at least people who came right afterwards and settled in Plymouth or Boston. And so originally in my first few books, I attacked it from the history from the 1600s and what might have happened. But I was slowly realizing that if you jump to the 17 and 1800s and start looking at the people who moved there or searched for treasure there, they came out of a certain group of people. FDR being the number one example, because not only did he descend from a number of Mayflower people, but he was a Grand Master of Freemasonry, and he actually traces back to a guy that owned Mahone Bay, who was a Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia. So he's my prime example. But everybody's books can be criticized, including mine. I don't stand above anybody else. I know a couple of books, particularly Randle Sullivan's, he put a timeline in for Nova Scotia, and he never even mentioned the year that it was founded and who founded it and then how the name came about. So I don't think you can ignore all of this history. Like, for instance, there's a charter for Mahone Bay. It was called something different back then, from 1630, these same Scots. And I'm the only one mentioning that. I'm the only one mentioning anything in here. Well, I say I'm the only one. I'm not. I'm the only one that's mentioning it in detail. But 6 other authors have pointed to William Alexander as possibly being the behind it, or at least aware of it. And those include some pretty heavy hitters. Reginald Harris, who was considered the first book writer on Oak Island, Court Lindahl, Mark Finnan, who's very prolific and great writer on Nova Scotia, and some other people as well. So,
but here's the point. I think that you have established that there's a history at Oak Island that goes much beyond 1795. It starts much earlier than that, and that some of the things that appeared in, like, Darcy O'Brien's book, The Big Dig, suggesting that there was something mysterious about Oak Island prior to the boys getting there to start the digging on Oak Island. So there's a history that precedes that, a great history that precedes that. I'm wondering here, though, that you have said that the Scots were chased off or chased out of Nova Scotia. It was ceded to the French, and then the British came back and got it back. But I'm wondering is if you look into the 1700s, you've got some kind of a British military occupation on the island, some kind of naval occupation where it would be a good place to repair ships and that sort of thing. And it seems like some of the stuff that they've been finding in the last couple of seasons supports that idea. It looks like they're looking at docks. They're looking at those sorts of facilities. They're finding debris suggesting that you're repairing a ship and you throw it overboard. The debris, you throw it overboard, and that's what they're finding now. And I don't see anything that really suggests that that's not a viable thought. And that, to me, kind of takes away the idea that there's some kind of treasure buried there, that it was a place that was used for literally hundreds of years. And that's why they find these materials. And there's really no great evidence of a buried treasure there. They haven't found anything to be suggestive of a buried treasure.
Well, they did find a piece of parchment in 1897 down about 150 feet. So that is kind of inexplicable. But
I would say allegedly. I would say allegedly found it. They also found 3 gold chain links, I think years earlier. I'm wondering if some of that wasn't promotional material created by the people trying to fund expeditions to Oak Island to recover the treasure. That some of that material has been salted.
Some of it may have been, but the man who found the parchment, I mean, for what it's worth, he swore an affidavit in front of a justice of the peace, and he had a reputation of being an upstanding citizen from that area. Now, all of that could be phony too. But one of the issues with my work is that I've written 1,100 pages now of very detailed. Every single page is just buried with detail that's backed by documents. And so in a 1-hour radio broadcast, I can't do it justice, and they didn't do it justice when I was on the show. You know, they tried to, but things get twisted. And I'm not saying this to sell a book. I'm saying if somebody wants to truly understand my theory, they need to read at least one of them. Probably Oak Island Nights would be the one that tells the theory the best. One thing that we had fun with was a medallion was found up at New Ross from 1671, and the gentleman had held it since the 1970s. They didn't know what it was. I found out what it was. It was a knighthood medallion, and there were only 3 people that received it that year, and I traced down the other 2 medallions, so we know exactly who it was given to. That was one of the meetings in the war room that never got on TV, because it was a Saturday morning when we finally talked the gentleman into bringing it to the war room, and the whole Prometheus team was off and running. But what I'll say overall about the experience is that the people up there are very nice. They're sincerely chasing the story of Oak Island, regardless of what that story ends up being. And they're open to everybody. They were open to me, certainly, and they've had a lot of other people on there. Rick told me that they get people with theories that come in, and he said they espouse they explain their theory shortly, but then they have nothing to back it up. And he said, so we sit there and look at each other, wondering, well, what we don't even know what question to ask them, And he said that at least I come in with all the answers, which I do, So anyway, if I'm one of many theories, just that one show had 25 of them, and a lot of people never made it.
Well, I think here's the point, though. They've been on the air for 6 or 7 years or 8 years now.
8.
And I was very excited about that. I've known about Oak Island since the early 1970s and tried to keep up with what was going on there. But it seems that many of the theories that were looked at earlier, the borehole 10X, where they supposedly there was a box at the bottom of the borehole that they had a television footage of, a body at the bottom of it, and this sort of thing. And when they finally got down there, and I'm stunned that a diver could actually go down the borehole and get down to the bottom.
Yes, absolutely.
You got to give that guy some props for, I mean, I don't even want to get close to the borehole. But they got down there and there was nothing there. It was optical illusions, I guess would be the best way to say it. It just seems to me that every time they've looked at something and we've got some kind of excitement going on, well, look what we've got now, it turns out to be not that great. The finds that they make are all basically on the surface, and it's all things that you would expect people to have dropped at some point during their lives. You know, the locket or whatever it was they found that had the red stone in it, for example, was found on the surface. The coins are found on the surface. They've dug up great swatches of the island, and they really haven't come up with anything suggestive of a treasure there. And so when I look at all of that and I look at what they found and what you're saying now, it seems to me that what we're looking at is in the 1700s, a military occupation of some kind with a military installation there, and that accounts for some of the debris they found. And of course, then we've got people living on the island since that time as well.
Right. So that's definitely one theory out of many.
Yeah, certainly. But what do we have to suggest there really was a treasure there, or is a treasure there? What do we have to point to that other than the speculations for 220 some years?
Yeah. Well, I know that the boys on the island are as disappointed as anyone is when something doesn't work out. I also know that there are reasons things don't work out. One of them is permission. They can't get the permission they need to show something. Another one is permits. They can't get the permits to get in where they need to. Sometimes it's just logistics. I'll tell you one episode, we had a meeting planned for 2 months with an institution up there who it's rumored has a whole room full of Oak Island artifacts, and we had 8 different connections of that institution to Oak Island. And Rick and Doug and I and the Prometheus team was going to go up there. We had the date and the time all set. 2 days before the meeting, they canceled with no excuse why they canceled. So things like that happen, and it's a pretty big operation. I mean, I think what's seen on TV is a lot less than what really happens. There's a film crew of probably 12, 16 people. They have a production meeting in the morning. They say, you know, Joe, Sam, and Bill, you're going with Rick and Marty today to lot 5 or whatever, you know, and they spread everybody out. But they work all day long. They're out there. They start about 8 in the morning and they don't get back till about 8 at night. A lot of my war room meetings have been late at night. I have to wait around for them to finally come in. The last time I went, I pared my presentation down to 1 hour, and they kept me in there for 4 hours. And they were a lot more tired than I was, but they kept asking questions. So,
there's no doubt. I've been involved in productions. I know how that goes. There's an awful lot of hurry up and wait, and there's an awful lot of film that is taken without any kind of results. We're going to have to take our last break here. Your website is www.oakislandgold.com. Oak Island Gold, one word, all lowercase. The latest book is Oak Island and the Mayflower. And as I've said, my latest book happens to be the Best of Project Blue Book. I couldn't even remember the name of the book, for crying out loud. The Best of Project Blue Book, and I think those interested in the Roswell case would like to take a look at Roswell in the 21st century. And I'm going to promote it once more. Take a look at www.vietnamgroundzero.blogspot.com, which I think you'll find interesting. We will be back right after this with James McQUISTON about Oak Island. I am back with James McQUISTON. We're talking about Oak Island, the search for the treasure, and some of the, I guess, problems that originate with not only producing the program, but with trying to divine the history of Oak Island as well. I was fascinated by the idea that it was some kind of a native structure on the island that related to the dunes and the mounds in the Midwest of the United States. But I guess last night they pretty well debunked that and found it to be something not quite as exciting. You're familiar, of course, with that, and they found the charcoal bits and that sort of thing.
Yes, and I think that it sometimes makes it appear that they're grasping at straws, but I think what's happening is they're just filming as they go along. There's no scripting. That upsets me because I've been filmed for 12 hours and I never once was told anything to say. But Prometheus' goal is to have a show. It's that cut and dried. And so they're filming as they're going along. Not everything's going to work out, but they have all that film footage, and they are showing the nature of the search and the path it's taking. And without them and without the Oak Island team cooperating, we wouldn't know anything that was going on the island. So,
well, you have to admit that sometimes you get a tad bit hyperbolic with some of the finds.
Oh yeah, and I think that. Again, it's Prometheus is on a separate path from the Oak Island team, I guess is the most polite way that I can put it. But I have no bones to pick with anybody up there. They've been nothing but great to me. And they took my wife and I up there 3 times, and they were very hospitable, and they listened to my theories. And one thing I will say is about the parchment. I mean, I think it was Einstein or somebody said that you can believe that nothing's a miracle, or you can believe that everything's a miracle, just how you want to look at life. But if one of the things they found was the parchment, and the very last item on the treasure list that was published back in the 1600s was parchment deeds that for these castles that this gentleman owned. Another thing on the list were 2 gold chains, and they found apparently 3 links of gold chains. So, let's
make one thing clear on the parchment. It's not just a big sheet of paper. It's just a little tiny scrap with like 2 letters on it.
Right.
So when we talk about parchment, we're not suggesting some large document. It's just a little scrap of paper, which is surprising they could find it given the circumstances. But once again, I just look at that stuff, and it concerns me that I think that there was a great deal of con going on in the 19th century as various companies were formed to recover the treasure. And I think the treasure that was being recovered at that time was more the people owning the company absconding with some of the cash that was spent on shares of those companies, as opposed to a real attempt to find a treasure buried on Oak Island.
And that could be true in some cases. Yeah. I mean, I'm not here to defend what they did on Oak Island for the last 225 years. I went to the documents. That's why I liked going there. I've never written a book about the actual excavations on Oak Island. I think that's been done and overdone. And I'll tell you, Doug Kroll has a wonderful website. And there's another one in England, oakislandtreasure.uk.co or something like that. But they have tons of documents, and I would be fish out of water in trying to delve into that. But because I had 4 decades of studying Scottish history, and I'm a fellow with the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, which I didn't get that by picking my nose. So I approached the whole thing from who moved there in the beginning, who was there. I looked at it and I thought, well, if it seems like this mystery would have started when Nova Scotia started, that would just be a logical conclusion, because to assume it started way, 3 centuries before that, when there wasn't even anybody known to be living there except maybe some First Nations people. But so I'm a historian. I'm into Scottish history. It is Nova Scotia means New Scotland. There were some items found in that, whether they're fake or not, they at least match some of the things that I've been talking about. So in order to understand my theory, at least, again, you'd have to read at least one of my books, and again, probably Oak Island Nights. Or the
I think looking at what you've said here today, I was not aware of that prehistory on Oak Island. And I think that's a fascinating thing that should be delved into much more than just starting it at 1795, because you're looking at stuff going on much earlier than that.
Yes.
I think that's an important aspect of understanding the whole thing. So we have an occupation on the island that starts around 1600. That's nearly 200 years before the boys started digging into the muddy pit.
Right.
But I'm just looking at what we've seen on the television from a dispassionate point of view, meaning I have no dog in the fight. And what I've seen and what they've presented to us in their way, suggesting to me that the real mystery is who was building all these things on Oak Island in the 18th century, as opposed to digging up the money pit. And that is where I'm coming from. And it looks like that may be a more viable solution than pirate treasure or Knights Templar treasure or the manuscripts of Shakespeare.
And I don't think that Rick Lagina would disagree with you, because when I was in one of my war room meetings and it was played on TV, so I know it somewhat by heart, but he said that the richness of Oak Island is in the story. And he firmly believes that. I mean, he listens to everybody's. And one time I was in the war room and I wasn't really bad mouthing, but I just kind of was joking about this other theory that had to do with the stars. And he immediately came back with some justification for it. So what he showed me was he is open-minded to hearing everything. They would like to know what went on. Of course, they'd like to pull up, the Ark of the Covenant or something. But their main search is for the history of the island. What transpired here? Why did it make millionaires spend millions of dollars, and some people like Fred Nolan and Dan Blankenship spend their entire lives there, 50 years apiece? And why people died? And
do you see an end game to this? Do you see an end game at all?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if the day comes when Oak Island, right now it's a tourist attraction, but that's secondary to, the tourists have to work around the work on the island. But I could see the day come when tourism is the number one, not driving force necessarily, but the thing that happens every single day there, because a long time ago, I said that the one big thing that the Curse of Oak Island kind of holds out to everyone is hope, because, whether they find anything or not, you're always hoping they do. And who wouldn't want to find, I was riding around with Charles Barkhouse. We went out to see the Nolan Cross stones, because I have a new theory on that. And we were coming back and he was just so jovial. And I said, well, you got to be about the happiest man in the world. And he said, well, why wouldn't I be? I search for buried treasure on an island every day of my life. And so I think, I wrote something that is on the wall in the Interpretive Center. And Rick had asked me for a quote. And I thought about it a lot. And I thought, well, what is Oak Island really all about? And if I can remember it, it's I said Oak Oak Island is not so much about solving the mystery as it is about experiencing the unapologetic fascination of youth again. Because when we were young, I was reading, I'm a little older than you, I was reading Count of Monte Cristo and Kidnapped and Treasure Island and stuff like that. And the world can sour a person pretty quickly if they let it, and I'd rather not get soured and keep on believing. I don't want to be a fool about it, but I'd like to keep on believing that there's something out there that's worth trying, a quest. Somebody having a quest in their life. And that's why I admire Rick particularly, but all of them, because he is on a quest. I was told that he works like 24/7 on that island. He's just there every day, or at least 7 days a week out there. And every time I've been there, he's been there. And one time, I'll tell you, just quick anecdote, because I know we're probably out of time, but we had been on the island talking for quite a while, probably had a meeting that day, and I'm getting ready to leave, and he goes to his pickup truck and gets a chainsaw out. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, we've got the dynamite charges planted out there. I've got to cut a new tour pass." And I'm thinking to myself, you are basically the star of the show. Go sit down in a chair and sign autographs and get some flunky to go out and cut your tour pass. But no, he was going out and doing it again. And another person that was standing there, as he walked away, they said, "That man, he's just keeps working it. He's here 10 or 7 days a week." So he's dedicated. It's kind of neat to see people dedicated to something and have a quest. How it'll turn out, I don't know. Like I say, it's likely that it'll be a tourism site. Let's put it that way. It is now, but I mean, that's secondary to the search. But
let me thank you for taking time out of your day
Sure.
to share your insights to what's going on in Oak Island. I certainly appreciated it.
No.
The website is www.oakislandgold.com. Oak Island Gold, all one word, all lowercase. The latest book is Oak Island and the Mayflower, and you've mentioned a number of other books. Thank you for joining me here on A Different Perspective.
thank you. It was so much fun.
I'm glad you had fun. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Next week, with any luck at all, we will be having Avi Loeb, the astronomer, the Harvard astronomer, who is talking about the alien artifact that passed through the solar system a couple of years ago. We'll have him on the show, and we'll be able to chat with him about his theories and his excitement. Maybe trap him into talking about UFOs a little bit and his feeling about the possibilities of interstellar travel and that sort of thing. And in the coming weeks, we'll have additional guests, obviously, talking about the latest trends in ufology, where we're going, what's being found, what's being discovered, possibilities of disclosure or the lack of disclosure, given the fact that we have a new administration here in the United States, which I think is going to be awfully busy with what everybody else is busy with right now, which is solving the economic problems and the COVID-19 problems, and getting us somewhat back to normal. And I always like to mention my blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and I'll be talking about I'll have more information up on there and some links to various sites that'll help you understand maybe a little bit more about Oak Island if that's where you're interested. And as I've said a couple of times now, www.vietnamgroundzero.blogspot.com will give you a little insight into my experiences in Vietnam, and the science fiction site will provide you with a look at my feelings on science fiction, things that I think are related to UFOs and the study of ufology. Science fiction kind of crosses into that arena, which is how I got into it. Yeah, but you need to understand that. And as I say, there's other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network and about the paranormal. I'm sure there's something that will spark your interest. And again, thank those of you who have bought copies of my books. I certainly appreciate that. It helps me out a little bit and that sort of thing. So you have been listening to A Different Perspective on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and I'll be back in about 167 hours with a new guest and some new insights. So thank you for tuning in.